Hi everyone, it's Michelle here. Today we're going to get a jump start on some holiday cards. So I have this stamp set from the Alleyway Stamps that's called Mistletoe Kisses, and it has a bunch of small images that I'm going to be stamping repeatedly to create a full watercolor card. So I have two 4¼ by 5½ sheets of watercolor paper here, and I'm making two cards at once because I feel that if you have all your supplies out, you might as well do two, especially since you always need more holiday cards. So I'm starting here with my Hero Arts dye ink, and this is a waterproof ink since we are going to be doing watercolor. You could also use StazOn ink. And I've just taken two images and I'm repeatedly stamping them around the sentiment, which I've stamped in the middle. And the one on the right, as you can see, I'm stamping this Santa image and just completely covering the entire background around that sentiment. And then on the other side, I have this cluster of poinsettias. I think I'm saying that correctly. And again, I'm filling up the entire background with this. And some of them you can see I didn't exactly stamp it perfectly, but you can always go over this at the end after you've done your watercolor. So once I finished that, I pulled out some Zig Clean Color real brush pens. You can use any kind of watercolor marker, but I really like these ones, and they have really bright and vibrant colors that I think will be perfect for this. So I'm going to go ahead and really quickly fill in some spaces, and you can see here that I'm doing this really quickly and I'm not coloring the entire area with color. I'm just going over where I think the darkest color would be, and then later on I'm going to come in with water and blend it all out. But for now I'm just doing all the marker parts at once, all the dry parts without water, just so that I can get that done more quickly and not have to worry about messing up any of the wet areas. And I'm doing the same on the other card. You can see how having them next to each other really makes this go by quickly, because instead of moving one card aside while I work on the other, I can do both of them at once and kind of do the same steps at once also. So I can color all of these areas with my markers, and I'm not being too precise about where they go, especially for the poinsettias, because that would take a little too much time if I really thought about where all the shadows would go. So what I did was I kind of just stuck to one side of each leaf, and later it'll all blend out and look fine anyway. And then after that I went in with a light green marker and just went around all of the edges of those stamped images. And this will create a really nice background, and I'm doing the same on the other card but with blue. I just tried to choose colors that I thought would contrast with the main color in the image really well but still look really festive. So I think red and green obviously are good Christmas colors, and I think the blue is a really nice winter color, so that goes with the Santas on the right. So now that all of my dry coloring is done, I just came in with a really small brush and some water. You could also use a water brush if you want, but sometimes I like to use a normal brush because I think that you can get a little more control out of that, and especially control how much water you need to use. So you can see how I'm really quickly blending all of these colored in areas, and it creates that variation of dark and light since I didn't color in the entire areas. And you can always go in afterwards and build up more color to have more contrast if you think that your coloring has blended out too much. And now I'm blending out the background areas, and I really like how it looks when you only color around the edges of the stamped images, because it almost looks like there's a shadow or a halo around all of your images, but there's still enough color to completely cover the entire background, which I think is really cool because at the end it almost looks like it's a pattern paper because we've repeatedly stamped this image, and I think it looks really neat, and you'll see that once I take all the tape off. And I'm going in on the card on the right and doing the same thing, just blending out those blue outlines to create this really soft watercolor background. And this isn't too hard at all because you don't have to be super precise. It goes really quickly since I've already come in with that marker to create those outlines. And also since it's watercolor, I feel like sometimes imperfections make it look even better because that's kind of just the style that you get when you're painting. It's a little more loose and artsy, so I really didn't sweat it if I colored outside the lines a little bit. So once that entire area was filled in, I also went in with a Wink of Stella glitter brush pen in a few areas. So especially with the card on the right, there wasn't too much color because I mean, Santa's hair is just white. So I came in with this glitter pen around the trim of the hat just to give it a little bit of sparkle. And then I did the same on the card on the left with just the middle parts of the poinsettia. But that was just really simple and quick and totally optional too if you don't have a glitter pen. But then I went ahead and carefully took off this painter's tape along the edges, and now you can see how it looks like a fully complete card already. And if you want, you can kind of just do this on a watercolor card base, and that would completely make your life really easy, and you wouldn't have to do anything extra. And you can see how I went over some of my areas where I didn't stamp perfectly with a black pen. So that's just a good thing to remember when you're stamping so many images, especially on watercolor paper, which has that texture. Sometimes you won't get a clear impression from your stamp, but it's really easy to go back at the end and trace over that. So just don't sweat it if you don't stamp everything perfectly the first time. Then I just went ahead and trimmed the edges off of the sides there because I do want to put this on a different card base rather than leaving that white trim around the edges. But before I do that, I wanted to add some kind of interest to the edges of my pieces. So I'm adding some embossed edges. This is a bit more of like a loose way of embossing. It's not precise at all. I just run my Versamark ink pad along the edges and pour some embossing powder over. So for the first one I used gold because I thought that went really well with the warm colors of the poinsettia. And then for the Santa one I used a silver tinsel one, which I think is really nice and festive. So again, this is a very loose way of using embossing powder, but if you want a more defined edge, you could always mat your pieces with maybe a sheet of gold foil cardstock or something like that. But here you can see the finished results of that. Especially on the silver one, you can see how there are variations of thick and thin where I've embossed because it just really matters how much you rub the Versamark ink pad onto the edges. But I just think this is something fun and different. And I'm adhering these to some craft card bases because I think that'll just match really nicely with both of them and you don't really have to worry about picking the right colors. So I just kept it really simple with that. So here are some close-ups of the finished cards. I think it's really fun to use small images like this as almost like creating your own background. And this is really great because you can do this technique with any images you have and create this full watercolor look. And it's just really fun and festive and you get to use some really bright watercolors with it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you are interested in seeing some other tutorials, make sure to subscribe to my channel and you can also click through to see some of my most recent videos on screen here. Thank you so much for watching and I hope to see you again soon.